Okay, we're going to do a quick breakdown of a Glock 17 today. A lot of people have been asking how to take the weapon completely apart, complete disassembly instead of just field stripping. So we're going to do that pretty quick. And I'll try to not talk too much because I know that can be distracting, but I'll try to name the parts as well as I'm taking them out, just so we all have some common nomenclature here. First thing to do anytime you're working on any gun or really handling any gun, always assume it is loaded and do your own personal safety check regardless of what anybody else says. So I'm going to lock open the slide, remove the magazine, which you can tell was empty, and visually and physically inspect the chamber to make sure it is empty. Put the slide forward and drop the hammer. To take the slide off the frame, we're going to just pull back about 1/4 of an inch on the slide and pull down on the slide stops and slide the slide assembly off of the frame. I'm going to start with a frame disassembly just because it seems to be a little more complicated for most people. Really, it's very simple. It's just a matter of a few pins. The only tools you're going to need, slot screwdriver will help. You can do this without it, but it helps. A 3/32 pin punch. For newer weapons or weapons that haven't been fired very often or well maintained, a small hammer can help, and that's just for hitting the punch, not the weapon itself. And finally, I use a larger starter punch for the trigger pin. It just gets a little bit larger surface area on the pin itself rather than just a little 3/32 punch. First step here, I'm going to go ahead and remove the trigger housing pin, which is in the back right here. And usually you can just push that out even on newer guns. If not, that's why you've got your little hammer. Set that to the side. Do the locking block pin, which is the top pin here on the frame. This one tends to be a little bit tight. Yep, this is a newer gun, so knock that out. I am working on a wooden table, so that sounds like a lot harder hit than it actually is. I'm really not applying much pressure at all. Slide that pin out. The last pin that we're going to do is going to be the trigger pin. I like to start this with the larger punch and then go to the pin punch. You might be able to do this one with just hand pressure. Nope. Set that pin aside. You can see I had the frame upside down, so the slide lock actually came out, and it just slides in between the trigger and the locking block. And lift up on the locking block. This is where it helps to have your little slot screwdriver. Just pry that out. And finally, we'll take the trigger assembly out. Lift up on the front of the trigger bar, and then up on the ejector, and pull out the entire assembly. Now, the last parts to disassemble, you're going to take the trigger bar off of the housing, slide the trigger bar forward, and then just twist up and out. And then you can see, hopefully I can get a good shot of that, I'm just going to slide it off of the trigger spring. The last part, there's really no need to do this unless you're polishing or replacing the connector, is just to pull the connector off. Slide your screwdriver in and pry, a twisting motion, and it'll just slide right out there, no pins. That's your disassembled frame. Set those parts aside. Okay, moving on to the slide. Pull the recoil spring assembly out. Slide the barrel up and back. And you're basically field stripped. To start disassembling the slide, you're going to push back on the striker until it locks into place, and see if I can get a shot of this. There's a little sleeve right here. You're going to put your punch in and push down on that, and then slide the back plate off. There is some spring pressure, so just be careful, hold your thumb over it, make sure that you don't lose your spacer flying out with the striker or your extractor plunger assembly. So, slide your striker out and the extractor plunger. To remove the extractor, push in on the firing pin safety. It just falls out. And then finally, we just remove the firing pin safety. And that is your completely disassembled Glock 17. Okay, before I start reassembly, I have had a couple questions about spring sets to lighten the trigger pull and give you a little bit of a crisp, clean trigger, more like that on a 1911, which a lot of people seem to want to emulate with a Glock, which really isn't that possible. One of the springs you're going to replace is going to be the striker spring. This one is by Glock Works. It's really easy to pull off. All you do is place your striker down on the table, slide the spring down, and pull the spring cups out, and then the spring will come up and out. To put it back together, you just reverse what you did, and on this one, when you push down, it tends to push the striker down as well, so try and with your offhand hold the striker up, otherwise you're going to have a heck of a time trying to get the spring compressed far enough to get the spring cups seated back in there. And of course I'm going to have trouble because I'm doing this on film. That's all it is there. The second spring in the slide that you're going to replace can be the firing pin safety spring, and all that does is just pulls out and pops back in. Easiest thing in the world. To reassemble your slide, I'm going to go in reverse order here. I'm going to start by putting your firing pin safety back in the hole, spring side down, and putting your extractor back in. It can only go in one way, so if it doesn't go in, you're doing something wrong. The little bulbous portion here goes to the back. That's what actually locks in behind the firing pin safety and receives the pressure from the plunger. So push down on your firing pin safety, drop your extractor into the slot, lift back up. As long as it doesn't come out, you're good to go. Go ahead and put your plunger back in, spring side up, and finally your striker. Slide that back down in. Alright, ready for your back plate. This one tends to be a little bit of a pain just because you have to depress those springs to get it in. Another reason I like this larger punch. I'm going to start with the spacer sleeve, push that down until the back plate slides over it, which will hold it with enough pressure to pull it to keep it back. And sorry, you can hear my dog growling in the background. And finally, I'm going to push down the plunger with the smaller punch and just do the same thing. Slide my back plate forward and lock into place. From there, you're just reassembling from a field strip. You're going to slide your barrel back in and slide your recoil spring assembly back in place. Your slide's completely reassembled. Alright, now that we've got our slide put back together, we're going to go ahead and reassemble the frame. Really quick, I talked about the two springs that you could replace in a spring kit on the slide assembly. The one spring that you replace on the or inside the frame is the trigger spring, and all this does, the spring just hooks onto the housing there. You just slide it off and slide a new one on. I'm not going to do that on this one because it's a little bit tight. We don't really have time for it. So put that back together. You're going to go ahead and take your connector, which is another common piece to be replaced. This one happens to be a stock one, just polished, and I really don't see any reason to put a new connector on there as long as you get yourself a mirror polish. It's going to give you a nice trigger pull. Slides back in its slot. Make sure you seat it completely. Should be flush at the bottom. There go the dogs again. And we're going to take our trigger bar, connect it back to the firing pin spring. Just slides into place. And we're going to pull forward again and just twist the housing, or excuse me, twist the trigger bar back down into the housing. Going to go ahead and seat that assembly back inside the frame. Everything just pushes into place with that increased spring pressure in the back. It'd be a little bit more annoying. Won't be like that on a stock gun. I'm going to go ahead and put the locking block back in. Go ahead and get that the right way. That just seats into place. And the last piece we're going to put back in is the slide lock, which slides again between the trigger and the locking block. And start with the pins. We're going to take the trigger pin first. I like to go from the opposite side. That way I can make sure that I am getting good contact in here and not pressing too hard against that slide lock, which tends to get itself moved around a little bit. Next up, the locking block pin. This one takes a little bit of pressure. Don't know why it's so tight on this gun, but it is. You can see, try and point this out to you, a small spring up here. We're going to go ahead and put that below the trigger pin or the locking block pin. Just push down with either your punch or your screwdriver, anything that's a little bit easy for you to use, and it slides right down under that pin. That's what actually gives you the spring pressure on your slide stop or slide lock. And finally, make sure everything's lined up. Get your pin pushed in, and we'll seat that into place. There you go. The last pin we're going to put back in here is the housing pin, and that just slides in, and it doesn't have any recesses in it to lock into place, so you just kind of finagle it back in there and it'll go. I always push a little bit too hard on it, which ends up moving it too far one way or the other. There we go. Last step, slide back on your frame, and always do a function check. Again, even though you just took this apart, you should always make sure it is unloaded. Just verify, point the weapon in a safe direction, make sure you fire while still holding the trigger down. Cycle the action, reset the trigger, fire again. As long as everything tests right, you're good to go. That's it for the Glock. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, happy shooting.